Patricia is joining us from Aberystwyth, north of Wales, and presenting work on reaching control for pre-reach grasping, with Mark Lee.
It's Lakon.
Lakon, Bernard Tidman, and Elliot Tucci. As soon as you're ready, Patricia.
Okay, so the work I want to present today is a mix of different work. Some of it's quite well developed, other it's very preliminary work. And so the initial work I want to present is from the I'm Clever project, some work that we did. So what we do is looking at robot development, and we're actually looking at how infants have learned and try and apply that to a robotic platform. So we've looked at the stages in which the infants go through development, and there's actually a series of very clearly defined stages that they develop through. So when they're first born, they've got very limited muscle control, very limited sensor information, and this actually constrains what they're able to learn at any one time, which really focuses the learning on particular areas of interest. So to start off with, you're learning the eye control, then as you develop the eye control, your neck muscles start to develop, so you can start to learn neck control, and it builds up through the system. We've identified this timeline and applied it to the robot. And we've got an architecture here which represents the eye and head control, and this is based on architectures from neuroscience for the superior colliculus. And what you can see, get the maps works. So we've got sensory motor maps here, and these are basically very simple maps that we actually have developed to use to be able to link the sensory information to the motor movements that we're making. So through a series of head-bin learning, make a series of random motor babbling, and we'll learn how the motor movements we're making affects the sensory information we're perceiving. And that's how we very quickly, very rapidly build up these maps and build up to this architecture. But I don't want to go into that too much detail, I want to go on to the more interesting aspects. So this is essentially just a summary again of the different stages that we built up through the eye curve. So we've got 3 degrees of freedom in the eyes, 2 degrees in the neck, and these all build up in a very hierarchical manner, so expanding on the knowledge that we've already got, that we've already gained to build up through this system. Okay, so getting on to the more interesting aspects of the reaching. So again, we've looked at how infants develop their reaching, and this actually goes right back to even before birth. So within reaching, when you're in the womb, you're actually moving your arms around, they're floating, so they're quite easy to move around without much muscle control. But during that period, you have collisions that you learn from, and they're both with yourself and with the uterine wall. And using that information, you actually start to gain a model of your environment, how your arms move around, and where the space around you, so the environment that you're working in. But of course, once you're born, you're actually not, your muscle control isn't sufficient to counter gravity, no longer in the liquid. So your arms aren't moving very much. But when they do start to move, they're making large sweeping movements, just random big movements, but there's no vision involved. The vision at this point isn't particularly good. But you are then learning how to make these large movements. Now, at a later stage, you actually start to incorporate vision into this reaching. So maybe that you see something, you want to interact with that, you want to reach out towards it, you know how to make vague reaching movements in that direction. So you're now having a visually elicited movement in that direction of the object. And to start off with, you might completely miss, you might not send the object flying, but over a period of learning, you will actually refine your reaching to be able to reach towards that object quite reliably. And then the final stage is actually visually guided reaching. So when we actually want to refine that reach, we need to have this information which links where the hand is in space and where the object is. And at that point, we start to introduce hand regard, and that's starting to specifically reduce the error between where you want the hand to be and where it actually is, linking the hand to the object. And we've applied this to the robotic platform. We've built a vector-based reaching system, and essentially what we've done is we've gone through these stages. In the early stages, it's learning these various fields that it knows how to reach to. And these fields essentially consist of motor positions in space and have some kind of understanding of the space that they're operating in. And that was done in simulation, of course. We don't want to necessarily break the robot by hitting lots of things. But we can build up quite a nice map. We can identify key fields where are actually useful fields to operate from. And what you tend to find is actually there's a position up by the head where you get a very useful pre-reach position, if you like, particularly when it comes to visually listed reaching. because from this point, the reach that you're actually going for is pretty much along the line of sight towards the object. But once we have these fields, we're starting to learn the finer control. We learn vectors from each of these fields, so moving the arms out in different directions, and learning what direction the arm moves in response to particular motor movements. And then when we actually want to reach somewhere, we can combine all the vectors together to get the direction, the trajectory that we're actually interested in. And we can also use this to specify the orientation of the hand that we want it to be in at the end of the movement. So this is roughly what the vectors look like. So a series of fields, the blobs of the fields, the positions of eccentric space, and then the lines coming out and the vectors that you learn. Now, this is quite a populated map. You can actually operate as few as 6 fields with vectors coming out of them, or you can have lots more fields to get a more detailed map. So either way, what you can actually do is see these trajectories here. So the green line is if you just told the robot to make a movement to a particular joint position, it'd make a very unnatural movement that you get it to the point where you want it to be, but it wouldn't necessarily be a very smooth trajectory. What we're actually able to do is, using these vectors, take an almost straight line trajectory to where we want the hand to be in the side orientation as well for the object. So that brings me on to the actual linking the grasping into it. Now, so far the vision system we've been using has been quite primitive. It's been very much colour block detection. So what we've got is a PhD student who's just started, and he's looking at trying to have a more neuroevolution-based active vision system. And so he's looked at the work by Marco Morelli, and he's trying to re-implement this model that we see in the bottom right. So essentially using a neural network to control also not only the identification but also the motor movements themselves. So essentially this neural network takes in motor movements that you're making, moves the eyes around to particular places on the image in order to be able to identify and learn about what that image is. Now, currently this works with letters in italics, so down here we've got an example of it identifying the italic letter L. What we'd quite like to do obviously is increase this to more complex images and actually be able to interact in the real world. So we're looking at different ways of trying to reduce the size of the neural network, or at least allow us to process more complex images by adding some pre-processing into that. So currently they're using looking at genetic algorithms, and they've got some uniform LVPs and hogs that they're trying to apply to the pre-processing in order to be able to reduce the complexity of those images and also get a faster learning rate. And then finally, we want to link this into some other work that we did a while back, or some people in the department did. So essentially what we've got here is we've got the top part is the reaching control, which we've developed our sensory motor control to replace that. And now we're looking at the vision system, which would replace the visual cortex on the left. But what they have is, we'd quite like to make use of, is this grasp control loop. And essentially what they've done is, using a data glove, they've measured different grasp structures that you'd have for different shapes of objects. And using these, they can actually apply that model to a robotic hand, and then take synergies. So if you want to grasp an object, you can compare the different shapes and look for the best shapes to map onto the object. This is all quite preliminary work, so I guess that's probably my time up. Okay.